All right, class. So moving on to the nervous system and the nervous tissue, we will talk about the basics of the nervous system today, see how things work, and then our next chapter will be the brain. We'll talk about the details of the brain, and then spinal cord followed by the senses. Okay, so if you think of the nervous system, what is the main function? Obviously, the nervous system is the body's primary communication and control center, right? It controls everything that we do. So our nervous system is responsible for receiving sensory information. It receives information and it makes a decision about what action to take. And then the nervous system sends out motor command that controls all our actions, that controls skeletal muscles, smooth muscles, glands, all these things, cardiac muscles. Therefore, few things. The nervous system receives information, and it receives information via the receptors, right? We have receptors throughout our body. Our special senses have receptors. For example, we have receptors in the eye that carry sensory information about vision. We have receptors on the tongue, like taste buds. We have receptors in the ear. So we have receptors everywhere in our body, which carry sensory information towards the central nervous system. Once received, central nervous system processes those information and sends out motor command to skeletal muscles, smooth muscles, glands, and adipose tissue. All right, if we think about the nervous system, it has two main types of cells. The first one are the neurons, which are the larger cells. And on the right hand side here, you do see a picture of a neuron. That's a neuron. Now, neurons, few things about neurons. These are excitable. You can excite a neuron. These are excitable cells. Neurons, they are non-mitotic, meaning if a neuron is damaged, especially the cell body, if it's damaged, there is no way we can regenerate the neuron. And obviously neurons, they carry electrical signals, right? So they're excitable and they are non-mitotic. And then we have some supporting cells called glial cells, which are not shown here. Glial cells, they are non-excitable. You can never excite a glial cell. And they are mitotic, meaning they do divide by mitosis. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the neuron that we see here. We do see the cell body or the soma with a nucleus and a nucleolus inside. We also see a lot of cytoplasmic organelles within the cell body. Radiating from the cell body, the cytoplasmic extensions are called dendrites. I want you to know that the dendrites are the receiving part of the neuron. Dendrites receive sensory information. And the soma or the cell body, it integrates all that incoming information. And after integrating the incoming information, the cell body leads to the axon. As you can see here, the axon is the long extension of the cell body. That's an axon. And the axon carries action potential, meaning the axon carries electrical current. Action potential is nothing but electrical current. So that is transmitted via the axon. Therefore, let's review. We know the cell body, we know the dendrites, we know the long axon. Dendrites receive information, cell body integrates the information, and axon carries action potential towards a downstream neuron or towards a muscle. Now, look at the junction of the cell body and the axon. At the junction, you do see a structure called axon hillock. I want you to understand that it is at the axon hillock that the action potential starts. So the action potential does not start in the cell body. Cell body is the center for integration. Action potential starts at the axon hillock and continues all the way down through the axon and towards the axon terminals. The distal end of the axon, you see the branches. Those branches are called telodendria. And then at the very tip of the telodendria, we have synaptic knobs. And we will talk more about these a little later. Radiating from the axon, we have some branches. Those are called axon collaterals, as shown here. These are axon collaterals. And here we also see the axon being myelinated. The white sheet that kind of wraps around the axon, that's called myelin sheath. So this is a myelinated axon. Okay. Moving on. So we will look at the structural organization of the nervous system. Structurally, the nervous system can be divided into central nervous system and we have peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of two things. It's made up of the brain and the spinal cord. The brain and the spinal cord makes up the central nervous system. Now, and the peripheral nervous system is made up of cranial nerves, spinal nerves, and their ganglia. Let's talk about this a little bit more. Now, okay, so peripheral nervous system is pretty much nerves and ganglia, but what are they? Let's define them. Nerve is defined as group of axons outside the central nervous system. I want you to write this down. Nerve, group of axons outside the central nervous system. That's a nerve. Ganglion refers to group of cell bodies outside the central nervous system. Cell bodies outside the central nervous system. So what's the key point here? The key point is peripheral nervous system lies outside the central nervous system, made up of cranial nerves, spinal nerves, and their ganglia. Nerve, how do we define nerve? Group of axons outside the central nervous system. Ganglion, group of cell bodies or soma outside the central nervous system. Really, really important concept. And there will be so many times in Unit 5, we will talk about nerves, ganglia. So make sure you understand these two terms. There are two other definitions that I want you to know. Those are called tract. Actually, I should not draw here. I should just put it here. Tract and nucleus. Tract is defined as group of axons within the CNS. So group of axons within the central nervous system. That's tract. And nucleus is group of cell bodies within CNS. These four definitions, you should remember these in your sleep. Okay? Really important. All right. Now another concept. Now let's say you are right here. We are looking right here. Oops. Right here. So you are like 1/10 of an inch outside the central nervous system, right? Where are you? Are you within the CNS or are you in the PNS? You are in the peripheral nervous system. If you are 1/10 of a millimeter even, if you are 1/10 of a millimeter outside the CNS, you are not in the brain, you're not in the spinal cord, you are in the peripheral nervous system. Really, really important. All right, so let's take a look. So here we do see the brain and the spinal cord, and the brain and the spinal cord are making up the central nervous system as we discussed. And then we see all these yellow cranial nerves and spinal nerves coming out, and they are part of the peripheral nervous system. We also see these knob-like structures. Do you see? They are labeled as ganglia. Ganglion is singular and ganglia is plural. And therefore, the nerves, cranial nerves, spinal nerves, and the ganglia together, they make up the peripheral nervous system. One more time, you should know what is a nerve, what is a ganglion, what is a nucleus, and what is a tract. 4 definitions you must remember. Okay, so function of the nervous system, as we talked about before, it collects information. So there are receptors throughout our body, and those receptors carry sensory information towards the dendrites, and these sensory information then feed into the central nervous system. So from the receptors, information finally flows towards the central nervous system, meaning the brain and the spinal cord. Once the brain and the spinal cord receives the information, the brain and the spinal cord will process and evaluate that information, and then ultimately the central nervous system will send out motor command to the peripheral nervous system and ultimately to the effectors. Now, what are effectors? Effectors are structures or organs that receive the command from the central nervous system. For example, you can think of the central nervous system, your brain and spinal cord, as CEOs, right? They decide what to do and they command other people, okay, you do this, you do that, that type of thing. So effectors can be compared to other people of the company who are just doing or carrying out the orders, those are the effectors. So in our body, the effectors would be skeletal muscles. We move around because our central nervous system is telling us to move things around. So effectors can be skeletal muscles, smooth muscles, cardiac muscles, glands, adipose tissue. All these are effectors. Okay. So responding to information. So the central nervous system initiates specific nerve impulses or motor output or motor command that goes to the effectors. And as I mentioned before, the effectors can be the muscles, glands, and adipose tissue as well. Okay, functionally, this is really, really important. Functionally, actually, I should stop here and then start with a new video because it's already 12 minutes.